Oh, oh wow,
That's annoying. That's a
I've
weird little
never,
noise.
yeah, I've never had that happen
That's
before.
that's new. Yeah, that's new.
So let's talk a little bit. So we've done the last couple of sessions. We've talked a lot about boundaries. I've gotten a lot of good feedback on some of those discussions, and it made me well. It was interesting because I got some really good questions in the Q&A that also helped me realize that I think there's a lot of confusion on really maybe what needs are. So I've thought a little bit about that. So I'm totally willing to talk about boundaries and talk about needs, because in order to create a boundary, we have to have, I think, some idea of what our need is. So even after we have spent a couple of these sessions. Oh, I think another thing you're supposed to warn people is that this is not therapy. This is educational. Maybe you did do that, but I think when I said the word session, I was like, well, this isn't a session.
Yeah, this is not therapy, it's education. And yes, thank you.
But when I sat and really was thinking about it and seeing some of the questions that came through last time, there's a part of me that says, why don't like why don't you guys type in questions, like, but instead of almost like, here's the boundary help that I want to send to my partner or to my friend or to my child or whoever, help me understand what need is coming up for me underneath. And because when I got some of the questions, I sat there and I thought, I think we're still missing it a little bit of what boundaries are supposed to look like, um, what they look like in the attempt at need discovery. And so it made me wonder, some of the questions today, I would love for you guys to put in some questions around, like, these are the boundaries that I try and set, and let's figure out what your needs are. And your needs are really going to be internal, but we can play with that. So that was one idea I had. And then I thought we could talk a little bit about relational needs specifically. And so just so we're clear, needs within a relationship, they're going to vary by relationship, right? Um, I might have a friend who I have a lot of fun with and spend good time with, but there's not a lot of deep vulnerability. Maybe this friend comes over and helps me with projects that he or she is particularly skilled in, but doesn't maybe go very deep emotionally or vulnerably. Doesn't share with me a lot of their problems, but I still have a great relationship with them. I still enjoy their company. So vulnerability is a need. Emotional connection is a need. Intimacy, honesty, those are needs. Trust, safety and security. That one's an interesting one because people tell me all the time, I have a boundary and I need safety. And I have gotten to a place in recovery work, I don't love the word safety, because we know what safety feels like when we have it, but we don't know often what it looks like to get it, and it's very unique for us oftentimes. So belonging and acceptance would be a relational need. um, to be fully known without judgment would be a relational need. Love and affection, validation of feelings, having boundaries, having respect, having our boundaries respected, our needs within relationships, healthy and supportive touch, freedom to have your own reality, right? So I can go through even more various relational needs that we might have. But when we create, if you will, a boundary, we're trying to figure out how to meet those needs. And too often we surrender to the other person within our boundary that my need can't get met unless you do such and such, that leaves us feeling powerless. That leaves us feeling violated, as opposed to us recognizing this is my need. I'm going to extend to you an opportunity to fulfill that need. And if you cannot fulfill that need, that may define our relationship a little differently, right? Like, for instance, Scott had somebody who was supposed to show up and do this webinar for him. I was sitting here and I sent him a text. In fact, I sent him 2 text messages and an email like, hey, are we doing this? Right now, he had a need for somebody else to show up. That person did not show up. Now, who knows why? And it doesn't mean that it's going to cause some major rift in their relationship, but it may create a situation where the next time he says, hey, can you cover for me? He's nervous. And he now is saying, hey, can you shoot me a message the morning of or an hour before letting me know you're going to cover this, right? That's him saying, can you show up and meet my need to help alleviate my fear and anxiety? And by him doing so, if you will, that is a boundary. In order for me to have less anxiety and more trust in the relationship, I would like you to send me a message and let me know an hour before or whatever it is Scott determines that his need is. And that person may say, yeah, no, totally, I get it, no problem. And they don't do it. So now his anxiety's through the roof and he reaches out, hey, I'm really nervous, do you got this? And the next time they say, oh no, I got it, don't worry. And he's glad that they showed up, but his actual need was really about creating trust and alleviating that anxiety, if that makes any sense. So in the boundary there that Scott might be putting forward is saying, can you show up for me? And if you don't, it is likely going to have an effect on some relational need that I have. Now, if in fact it affects Scott's, if it affects his self-worth, right? If that lack of a person showing up leaves Scott feeling like he is diminished, man, you know what? I can't count on anybody, and it's because, I'm a dirty addict. I was gonna make you spit your stuff out there, and so now he thinks because something's wrong with me, that's why people don't show up. We're not talking about relational needs anymore. This at that point becomes an emotional need that is a deficit within Scott. Now I can trigger that by not showing up for him, for instance, but the truth is that's Scott's wounded need, that his self-worth is dependent on whether or not I show up for him, when the truth is his worth to me isn't diminished, even if I blew it and didn't show up. So I don't know if this is too vague or out there, and I'm hoping that it will further our exploration and discovery of understanding boundaries and how they work. It just seems like you guys have been enjoying this subject, and so I'm hoping this goes somewhere. If you guys want to take it in another direction, just start asking me questions. But Scott, what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, I got what you were talking about because, it's like somebody let me down, I let you down. It's like, oh, I don't like that. I have a need to do what I say I'm going to do. And anyway, the person who forgot was actually texting me while you were talking. I'm so sorry. I did want to ask a question. There's a couple of questions in the Q&A. Just type your questions into the Q&A.
There's some good ones in the Q&A already. I'm excited for these.
As addicts, we are not used to getting our needs met. We are used to turning to an addiction rather than reaching out to get our needs met. And I think a lot of times,
oftentimes there's that underlying belief that I can't rely on anyone to meet my needs anyway, so why bother?
Right. And one of the exercises we do with guys in treatment at Seeking Integrity is, we walk them through, not only list what your needs are, but list whether they're met or unmet and who's meeting them or not meeting them. And if they're not being met, who could meet them and how do you go about getting them met? do partners of addicts need kind of the same process? Do they need to really examine their needs and whether they're being met or not? Because addicts definitely do, I believe.
Great question. Should we open that up and let the Q&A and the chat start blowing up on
Yes.
that question?
Yeah, let's let the Q&A in the chat blow up. And you want to take the questions in the Q&A while we do that?
Well, no, like I say that because I imagine you're going to have a bunch of partners jump in, and oftentimes partners get into a place where they say, you know what, I've been so consumed with trying to manage and keep the relationship stable that I've lost myself. And so when you lose yourself, whether it's to an addiction or to trying to love somebody else to be healthy, then we lose a sense of our own needs anyway, which comes down to that concept of I become needless and wantless. Now, the reality of it is we're certainly not needless and wantless, but if we have to keep surrendering our needs, we start to gain a skewed perspective of what our needs actually are. So then we don't really know what our needs are, and it gets covered up by sometimes a partner starts to take on this idea that if somebody doesn't need me, meaning if our relationship isn't enmeshed and I am not absolutely like woven into all of their problems and helping them get out of them, then I'm not lovable, right? And so we get these really skewed ideas of what needs actually are. And so, I mean, I'd be interested to hear, maybe our partners chime in, but when I'm working with most people in therapy, they either don't have a very good conceptualization, that feels like too long of a word. They either don't have a very good understanding of what their needs are, or at best, they have a decent understanding of what their needs are, but they lack a skill set on how to get them met, right? Like I know this need is there, but I have no clue on how to get it. So, to isolate the lack of needs to being a problem with somebody who struggles with addiction, I think would be quite narrow. But I think the question's wonderful. Like I struggle knowing what my needs are. I got into addiction as a result. So non-addicted people, do they just know what their needs are? Like it's like this beautiful, like curious question.
There's a couple of unicorns out there that probably know what their needs are and how to get them met, but I have not run across any of those individuals ever.
Oh, totally. I joke, right? Like I will say with some of the conversations I have with my kids, I'm like, okay, they're closer than I was, Now it might help that they have a therapist dad who's always trying to work on himself and make improvements. And, I do my best to own when I do stupid stuff, and that can help. But the reality of it is there's lots of really good parents out there who do a great job raising their kids, and there's kids still don't know what their needs and wants are, because no matter how hard we work as parents, life, society, culture, all sorts of things can mess us up and confuse us as to what legitimate and healthy needs are.
All right, let's jump into the questions here because I think you're right. We've got some great stuff here. My husband, the addict, and I were connecting, and every time we do, he does something to disconnect. For instance, he was on the computer on a meeting in our bedroom, which is fine as long as I know. And he stayed for the after gathering, but did not communicate about it, which is one of my boundaries. It was simple, but I feel like it erases an intimacy. Why is he doing that, and how should I respond? So he was doing something good. He was doing a meeting, and he was doing a little fellowship after the meeting. He just forgot to say, I'm going to do it in the bedroom. Do you mind staying in the living room? Basically, is how I'm reading that.
Yeah, it was, he stayed for the after gathering, but didn't communicate that. And so I think what's happening there is the meeting normally ends at this time and he's not coming out, but I don't want to go in, I don't want to invade, violate privacy, but now my anxiousness is going through the roof. And I could be getting this wrong, but, and so at that point, now I don't know that I can trust him. That sounds like that's what this person is going through. The question here is, why is he doing that and how should I respond? And I actually like where you were going first. You said it was simple, but I feel like it erases any intimacy. And what I would suggest here, your need, and you tell me if I'm getting this wrong, your need is to be seen and heard. You need him to see your fear. You need him to see that when you don't know what he's doing and he has maybe access to a computer alone, that brings up a lot of fear for you. And so your boundary is really you asking him, can you stop doing this behavior so that my fear decreases? And I think what you're really trying to ask is, there are certain scenarios where my fear goes up because they remind me of times where you acted out. And so what I'm asking you to do, I'm asking for transparency, relational transparency. Now, why is he doing it? Well, to be honest, he's probably not thinking that relational transparency is an issue here. I'm in the bedroom, I'm in my meeting, I'm actually doing something good by connecting people in recovery. So he's probably very narrow-minded and going, why in the world would this bother her? Really? Why would this bother her? You're alone in a room with a computer by yourself, telling everybody to stay out. Does that not remind you of your acting out behavior, right? Now, that might be a very sarcastic way that I could say that to him. And hopefully you're not hearing the sarcasm because I'm not actually feeling it. But the reality of it is, my guess is he really just doesn't think about those moments being an issue. And the reason is, we all have different things that would bother us. He's sitting there going, I'm doing good, right? And there's sometimes I think it's like a child. Well, I know that I'm safe right now, even though my parent has no idea where I am. Why would my parent be afraid? They should know that I'm safe, right? It's like that weird, I can see this, why can't everybody? But I would look at this and say, it sounds like your needs are for transparency, and you're trying to work on letting him know those moments that are particularly scary for you.
And we got some response there. It said, yeah, you're spot on. So 100% totally right. Yes. So I want to ask you about the very first sentence there of this question. My husband and I have been connecting, but every time he does something to disconnect. Can you comment on that?
Yeah.
I think it's pretty common.
Well, so here's the funny thing. What you're actually saying here, if I'm hearing you properly, because I don't think in this scenario, he's sitting there going, what do you mean doing something to disconnect? I went to a meeting and I was doing recovery work, right? This is one of those scenarios. At first, when I read this, I thought, oh, is this where because I've seen this a lot, where somebody gets intimacy and the intimacy is really scary to them. And so it's like they'll sabotage it. Yeah. So if you look at Scott's hands,
it's this. I'm like, come closer. No, too close. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I realize the camera like switches back and forth as one of us talks. So, so at first I was kind of thinking it was that. But if you're using this example, so sometimes it might very well be intimacy is scary, and so he might do something inadvertently to sabotage. He might do something advertently to sabotage, right? It's too scary. My shame's coming up. She feels really connected. I'm probably going to screw it up anyway. His shame stories just start running through his head, and next thing you know, boom, he acts out. Right? Super unhealthy, but it's helpful to realize and actually discuss it as a couple. Hey, talk to me about when intimacy occurs. What does that bring up for you? There's a part of you, I'm sure, that really likes it. There's a part of you that it would seem is scared by it. Well, yes, somebody who has used addiction to numb their intimacy their whole life, or a huge portion of it, is not going to find intimacy very comfortable. And so he could be sabotaging it. In the for instance that you shared, you're saying it felt really good to get intimacy, and I'm disappointed that something caused a disconnection. Well, my challenge to you is something always causes a disconnection for all of us, whether it's a busy schedule, whether it's school getting out or getting in, and family comes into town, or our car gets a flat tire or breaks down, and now we have less time to spend with each other. Life is about navigating navigating the issues that arise so that we can figure out how to get as much connection as possible. So in this scenario, it looks like a random accident. You're right. He should have been more open with you. Hey, I shoot you a text. Hey, I'm going to stay for the after meeting and get more connection, but that's why I haven't come out of the room yet. I just want you to know so that you're not worried. Right? That communication should not be a child communicating to mom for permission. That should be, hey, honey, I care about you. I see you, and recognize that this might cause you to feel confused and afraid. And I just want you to know that I'm doing what I need to do for me, and I'll be out, in an hour or whatever that looks like. So hopefully I just covered all sorts of random with that.
And we've talked about, often the loving spouse is the last one invited back into the intimacy party, because the loving spouse is the scariest person for an addict, because that's the person who matters most. It's a lot easier for me to be intimate with my sponsor or my therapist than it is for my spouse, because my spouse can hurt me. So that's why sometimes I think guys will let you in, but then they get scared and push you away, and hopefully it gets better over time. So should we move on? We got a bunch of questions here.
Oh, let's go. Let's try and get through as many as we can today.
Boundaries I'd like to establish with my sex addict husband. Haven't worked out the details. Appreciate your help. First one here: no contact with people he's had romantic relationships with in the past or interest in.
Okay, so we're just going to stop and go through the list. Is that all right, Scott?
Yeah.
So no contact with people he's had romantic relationships in the past or interest in. I want you to look at what your need actually is here. Your need here is for him to essentially create safety for you, or rather a commitment to you that he's going to be loyal to you. Right? Your need is loyalty. You're trying to set a boundary around not having connection with or contact with romantic relationships in the past or people he's interested in. And I understand and actually fully respect that request. But if we don't understand the need is loyalty. Because the truth is, somebody who's unhealthy will be like, sure, I won't have any romantic contact with romantic relationships in the past or people that I've been interested in. And that really doesn't matter because I have a whole slew of other people I can connect with, right? Like, I kept your rule, right? And so then that's a super unhealthy space for a person to be, but your need is actually loyalty. And this would be my guess, right? I don't totally know, you and I or whoever would need to explore this together, but would be loyalty. And then I would also kind of guess that what you're saying here is, I'd like to establish trust, right? And if you don't have any contact with people in the past or people that you've been interested in, then we can start to rebuild trust, and I can start to believe that you're going to be loyal, that we're going to have, that basically you're choosing me. Your need is to be chosen. And so, that's that one. And if there's something I'm missing, please put it in the questions and I'll go further with it. So I'll jump into the next one. No sex with anyone except wife. Okay, to me, that's back to loyalty, right? Like, so again, so really, yes, I think it's important to say, I'm looking for loyalty and devotion. And to me, no sex with anybody but me is loyalty and devotion. And if you can't respect that in our relationship, then you may have to come to terms with the ending of this relationship, or at a minimum, maybe for me personally, it might be that I'm not going to have sex with you while you're having sex with others, because that sounds really scary, and I don't want diseases or even just that, if that makes sense. And so I understand that you're working on recovery, and we're going to figure this out over time. But in order for us to have a long-term relationship, no sex with anybody but me. So again, the boundary is really, or the need is really about loyalty and devotion. And you're trying to define it by saying, here's what behavior would define loyalty to me. And I've seen people in relationships, I'm not suggesting that it would be healthy in my life, but that, everybody's, lots of different relationships are out there. It's okay for you to figure out what would define loyalty, and you don't even have to defend it. You just have to put it out there and ask the other person, can you either work towards this in the relationship to help me, or stop immediately, or let me know if you don't, and we can talk about it. Scott, anything else I'd need to jump in there? Or you want me to just keep going?
No, just keep going here. Yeah.
Okay, daily check-ins. Okay, this one is interesting. I think that a daily check-in as a task item, I think it's a great idea. And I think they can be very helpful, but we have to understand what the need is. Okay, I can say, hey, let's do daily check-ins, and we do daily check-ins every day, but they're like pretty unfulfilling because I'm always the one asking, right? So if my need is like reciprocation of vulnerability, then I'm going and saying, hey, I want to do daily check-ins, but I really would like you to initiate daily check-in every other day. I'll do it one day, you do it another. And so essentially, what I'm wanting is reciprocal vulnerability. I'm fine being vulnerable. I'll check in with you. You need to be vulnerable and check in with me. This will help to increase the connection in the relationship. So daily check-in is a great tool, but understand what your need is. And if it's about the other person being reciprocal, then I would be very open about that need. Otherwise, you might find yourself very easily disappointed and then frustrated. Well, why is my boundary not getting met? Well, we have check-ins every day. And you might get frustrated and go, I don't even understand. My boundaries aren't working. I'm not happy. This is my fault. Not a good way to go.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think most of the time, a lot of the time, daily check-ins turn into, no, I didn't act out today. No, I didn't think about acting out today. And that's not really building intimacy because, I had a rough day because this happened and I felt this way. And, it was really tough for me. What was your day like? That's building some intimacy and being vulnerable. Volunteering intimate information as opposed to just spitting out answers to, did you act out?
Let's go through the checklist, right? Daily check-in becomes checklist. All right, I did my duty, I'm out. And that's just not how relationships work, right? And too often, I'm going to throw this stereotype out there, and I'm fine to be wrong on it, but that too often somebody who's working in addiction recovery kind of gets a checklist mindset. Let me do everything right, and then I'll be okay. Well, that's your shame. Let me do everything right so that I measure up. No, let me do these things and see if they get me closer to my partner. And if I'm not feeling closer with my partner, let's reevaluate whether or not this works in the relationship or what we need to change.
So no porn and no masturbation.
Yeah, no porn, no masturbation. So again, let's look at what that means, right? No porn means when you are looking at pornography and fantasizing, right? Then I feel as though you are reaching somewhere else for your attachment. So I'm feeling a lack of loyalty, a lack of devotion. And so anytime you look, I'm not feeling, I want you to be reaching to me or to other people, not to some unhealthy place. Same with masturbation, right? The need there is to not be reaching outside of healthy relationships. I mean, we can go into that more if I'm missing something.
No, I think you nailed it. Let's take the next three together because I think they're all kind of, I mean,
No,
you can feel free to disagree.
No, it's fine. No closing computers, cell phone windows, or deleting history. No private emails,
Numbers.
phone numbers or accounts. No lies and secrets. Okay. What again? This is the need here is transparency, right? Transparency is necessary in relationships. Now, if I have a friend of mine, like I said, who comes over and helps me with projects, there's a certain level of transparency in that type of a relationship, right? That might not be the type of relationship where I have transparency about my sexual acting out history or whatever, right? Like in that relationship, I understand the level of transparency. But when you're in a marital relationship, the level of transparency, there is very little that isn't transparent, right? I might have a transparency boundary that says when I'm in the bathroom using the restroom, you are not allowed to be in here with me. And as a marriage relationship, that might be the extent of my boundaries of a lack of transparency. You know, I don't want you seeing me using the toilets, right? Like, and yet, so when you say no closing cell phone, computers, history, private emails, phone numbers, accounts, no lies or secrets, you're saying, hey, if I'm going to be married, we need to have total and complete transparency because that's what I would expect. In fact, I came into this marriage thinking that's what it would look like, right? Why in the world would we ever keep secrets from each other? So that's what I think. That's what's going on there. You know, obviously, if anything with a lack of transparency, I would say talk about it, what your transparency needs are within the relationship, and any lack of transparency, either expressed or unexpressed, becomes betrayal, right? And so we lose trust. So hopefully that makes sense.
Dr. Rob's definition of infidelity and betrayal is the keeping of important secrets from your primary romantic partner. It's not about any specific sexual act. It's the keeping of secrets.
Correct.
It's
right?
a betrayal.
Because if one partner says, I don't really care about the finances because I know you're going to take care of everything and we're going to be fine. And so you don't have the account information and you can't log in and do everything, but it's because you don't really care. Well, in another relationship, that lack of account information to the finances is going to be a huge betrayal. And somebody might be like, why? What does it matter? Well, because I don't have trust and there's not transparency and I don't know what that means or looks like. And so every relationship, it's going to look differently. And it's, in some sense, it's not wrong. You having a particular need isn't wrong. Even if the other person doesn't understand that need, your need is not wrong. So then leave the work office by 5 p.m. Okay. So that one is probably a need for consistency, you know, a need for dependability, right? I need to know when you're going to be gone, when you're going to be home, because I need to know if I can depend on you. Are you going to be home when you say you're going to be home? Are you going to, you know, pick up the kids when you say you're going to pick up the kids? So, and then I think the last one we've already covered.
Yeah, and I just want to validate, I think those are all very reasonable things to set boundaries around. I mean, is that your take too, Matt? I mean, there's nothing outrageous there on the ask list.
But we have to understand what we're doing when we put that boundary out there. What are we trying to communicate? So if I say to somebody, I'm trying to grab these, like daily check-ins was a perfect one. We need daily check-ins. Well, if I don't understand what my need is underneath, I could very easily, very quickly be frustrated, even if they're living the letter of that boundary, right? So this is why understanding the need underneath is so important. Otherwise, we can beat ourselves up for setting some rule out there. So again, the boundary or the rules aren't bad at all. Nothing in that list seemed problematic. But if I don't understand what's going on underneath, and I just get mad at my partner for not doing this, even though they might think they are, or they know they're not, and they think it's unreasonable. Well, we need to have an understanding, because you can put some of those out. You need to leave the office by 5 p.m. Well, I'm just going to go stereotypical. Let's say that's a male. Let's say the female is a partner, and she's telling her husband, leave the office by 5 p.m. Well, if he isn't understanding what's going on, or even if he does understand what's going on, but he is leaving begrudgingly at 5, feeling like, you know what, I hate it, I'm emasculated. She is telling me when I leave work. I mean, she might as well tell me when to use the bathroom and when not to, right? Like, I'm back to having a mom. I'm back to having a mother, right? There is nothing unreasonable about asking, leave the office by 5, but we have to understand, how does that request affect the other person? If the other person says, you know what, I'm having a hard time with that, because the truth is, sometimes I get a last minute phone call. Sometimes, I do have some unfinished business I have to take care of, or I can leave by 5, but I'm really struggling not to feel like a child. Okay, well then he needs to be open about him feeling like a child and saying, you know what, I'm going to work on leaving by 5. And if I ever leave after 5, I'm going to shoot you a text message, let you know what I'm doing, and let you know when I'm on my way. So, I just got a side thing here that said the leaving by 5 is connected with him acting out with coworkers during his after hours at work or his office. I totally knew what that was about. I mean, I had a decent idea, right? Whether it's acting out with coworkers, whether it's using the work computer, or, pulling over somewhere and acting out sexually, right? There's definitely something behind that, but understand, you could say leave the office by 5, and he's like, cool, I'll switch my acting out to lunch, right? Which, again, totally super unhealthy, not okay behavior, but your need isn't getting met at all. So hopefully that makes sense.
How do you manage a situation where one person's boundaries affect the other's ability to express needs or have needs be met? For example, a partner has set a boundary about the other doing things that trigger them emotionally, but this prevents hard conversations about the other partner's needs.
Oh, this is such a good question. The reality of it is you will never be in a relationship where you don't trigger somebody else emotionally. If you don't trigger somebody else emotionally, there is something developmentally wrong with one person. I shouldn't say wrong. That sounds so shameful. There's developmentally an issue going on in one person in the relationship, or there is no vulnerability or intimacy in the relationship. And I'm being very broad in how I'm saying this. I guess I'm just trying to communicate the idea that the truth is, every healthy relationship we have, we are going to trigger emotionally someone else. So the question really is, what do you do when a boundary is set? What I try and do when somebody says to me, like, for instance, I'll use an example as a therapist. I will tell people, hey, I'm asking you not to lie to me. I would rather you tell me, this is just me in therapy, I'm not talking about couples here for a second. I think I've probably even told this to my kids. I'm going to ask you not to lie to me, but I will ask you that what you say is, I'm not ready to answer that question, right? So that way I know we need to revisit this, right? And so you're not lying to me, but you're also telling me you're not ready to go here. And so then I might ask, okay, how much space do you need? When can we revisit this? Because I'm not sure that our intimacy is going to be able to increase until we revisit this, at least in this area, right? And so it's okay for somebody to say, this is really triggering me. I can't go here. And we basically say, I understand that. However, we can't avoid this forever. How much time do you think you need? Well, let me visit with my therapist this week and see if I can work through it. Let me reach out and call my support system, right? Okay, so should we try again tomorrow? Yes, I like that idea. Okay, would you like me to follow up or should you follow up or should we both do it, right? Like again, we're just trying to establish what are the needs that are going on here. And so it is possible that somebody always says, this triggers me, I can't go here. And there are times where we might have to say, okay, well, I might be in a relationship where I can never go there, this place with this particular person. I mean, that can happen. I would hope that most of the times we can find ways of working through it, even if it takes years.
We are 90 days since discovery. We've set boundaries, but the betrayed partner is living in fear of the addict acting out. How can she better manage her fear? And I'm so glad you didn't write how can I better manage her fear? So how can she better manage her fear?
Right. And it's kind of funny because make sure, I mean, I'm happy to talk a little bit about this. But at the same time, I hope she's wanting to hear the answer and that you're not going to use it as a way of maybe managing her recovery, right? And so I'm going to go with a gracious assumption here that you're just trying to help her out. So how can she manage her fear? Well, I think some of the best ways to manage our fear is by reaching out to other people. I mean, first and foremost, one of the best ways to get rid of our fear is to not be alone in them anymore, if that makes sense. So reaching out to other people, almost number one is my go-to, getting relational connection. Now, if the partner struggling with addiction is acting out or had been acting out, like you said, 90 days since recovery, then it's reaching out to others and saying, man, this is really scary to me. Asking other people, how did you guys get through this? And more than anything, I think our fear comes by, I think we have to surrender. The truth is, this person, your partner, might act out again and you will feel betrayed again, right? It's leaning into the idea that there is no perfection in recovery. And I've had spouses who have had long stretches of sobriety, but at the same time, there's still a ton of fear because the partner with the addiction isn't transparent, isn't, the polygraph will come back clean. So they're not acting out sexually, but they're not doing recovery work. So learning to let go of all the things we can't control that acting out might occur, learning to reach out to others, doing my self-care, doing my dailies, which are going to be what I need physically, what I need emotionally, relationally, and spiritually, and I'm working on those every day. I'm practicing self-compassion, and using my tools. I mean, all of those things are going to help manage my fear, which is totally legitimate. In fact, accept that you are allowed to have fear. Sometimes we don't want to accept that we're allowed to have fear. Well, you should have fear. Fear would be a natural response to betrayal. We don't like it. It doesn't feel good. So
at the 90-day mark, nobody should expect a betrayed partner to be out of fear by that.
Totally.
No.
From what I understand from the research, the 90-day mark is where the person that had the addiction is just getting back to baseline brain chemical stabilization, right? Like,
really, it's about the 6-month mark. Yeah.
Right. I mean, and it also depends on
perfect sobriety.
Right. And it depends on, like, what are we talking about? Because they can still be engaging in fantasy behavior. They can still be engaging in, maybe a substance here or there that doesn't cross the bottom line, but really isn't healthy, right? So it's like, it's one of those things that the truth is, fear would be natural and normal in that situation. But yeah, we don't like it. It registers in the brain the same as just pain. So trying to find healthy ways to get pain reduction.
How does the addict best recognize when escaping intimacy? I want to be more intimate, but am I really sabotaging myself? So this is an addict who's worried.
You know what? I love that you asked that question. I think that question is about you learning to recognize your discomfort. Because we were talking earlier about escaping intimacy. I think if you ask yourself, am I uncomfortable? Am I trying to make it go away by doing something else, right? Am I eating extra food I don't need to be eating? Or am I going on walks that aren't meditation? They are just getting out of the chaos of the house, right? Like, am I avoiding? Am I driving slower to get home from work later in a way? Like, it's really starting to tune into your comfort and your discomfort, and starting to own, I'm feeling uncomfortable even though things feel really good. Or it's learning to recognize your shame. And am I telling myself that I'm worthless and that I'm not lovable and that I don't deserve the good things that are happening? So if I were you, I'd really tune into your comfort or your discomfort and start talking about that openly as soon as you recognize it. And sometimes it's this pit in my stomach, a lump in my throat, you know, a burning in my hands. It can be just freezing and not saying anything. So I hope that helps.
Yeah. This next question is about disclosure. I want to read it. My husband and I just had disclosure. He thinks this is the end all of everything and everything should now be just fine. He just does not understand. It's the start of healing. How do I help him understand? Can we table that question and maybe do a discussion of disclosure in 2 weeks? Like what a proper disclosure looks like and what it means and how to move forward from that?
Yeah.
That's a much bigger question than we can deal with in 5 minutes here.
Yeah. I mean, we can totally hit disclosure. I mean, we've talked about disclosure quite a bit. I will tell you, I don't know that you're going to think, I don't think you're, how do I help him understand? I don't know that. I think that's just going to have to be a process for him. I mean, that's a great question. And I don't even know that I'd have an answer. The
This
truth
feels like
is,
an incomplete disclosure. Like, the disclosure is not an event, it's a process.
well, and I think that's the biggest struggle, is that sometimes, again, I'm going to be stereotypical. Somebody who struggles with an addiction kind of sees things as like, what I almost want to say is like milestones. Okay, well, we're past that one, so we're good, right? And it's like, oh no, 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 no. We got a long road to go. We did not hit the finish line here. So it's realizing, because most of the time a disclosure is a huge weight off their shoulders. And so he's probably sitting there going, oh gosh, I feel better than I've ever felt before. So we're good, right? And it's just a total lack of empathy that, okay, I took the weight off my shoulders and now you're carrying it. So anyway, that was just that's a quick thing that I think is going to take a little bit of time. Not
Yeah,
only to we, just empathy wise.
yeah. Come back in 2 weeks. We'll talk disclosure. I'm gonna talk Matt into a disclosure webinar. My husband struggles with intimacy inside and outside the bedroom and has had a decades-long porn addiction. Um, I don't know by with you say with intimacy if you're talking about sex, because that's common for porn addicts, porn-induced erectile dysfunction. Anyway, how do we reestablish romance and intimacy while he's working through recovery and he struggles with sexual anorexia?
Oh, that's such a great question. Gosh, this is a really hard one to answer, because he would really need to dive into what the issues are around his sexual anorexia. I mean, it's a fairly complicated and wonderful thing to explore. It's almost the opposite side of addiction, right? It's the pendulum swing, right? Whereas, you have addiction over here, you have sexual anorexia over here, and what we want to be is like healthy intimacy here in the middle, if that makes sense. And sometimes we move to sexual anorexia as a way of, I can see that my needs and desires are causing you harm, so I'm just going to shut down my needs and desires around sex, and so that I don't hurt you anymore, and so that I'm not a bad person. Well, the truth is, in that scenario, they've still got a lot of shame to work around. They still have a lot of, yeah, they may have stopped their behavior, but I would really work on the shame around sex and around intimacy. In Carnes' Facing the Shadows book, it's like a textbook, like a college textbook. It's like thick. I could grab it here somewhere, but I think it's like page 50 is where that starts. And you can find several sections throughout Facing the Shadows that goes through sexual anorexia. I certainly would work with a clinician who's versed in sexual anorexia. I mean, that shouldn't be a problem for a CSAT. But I would start exploring sexual anorexia and talking about the shame around sexual things. And then I would start in a way somewhat slowly. I would start by introducing sexual intimacy in the marriage and figuring out, like, does this bring up shame? Does that bring up shame? Sometimes it's, I don't want to release my passions and desires because I'm more likely to start acting out. If I suppress it all, right, it prevents me from acting out, so I can't have sex at all, right? And that's something that is pretty common, unfortunately.
Yeah. Collins writes about, the conundrum of the fact that conundrum's not the right word, the paradox of sex addicts being really horrible at sex for the most part. I mean, and it's true. There is what Matt just talked about with the shame issues, but there's also a neurobiological component, particularly with intensity addictions like sex and porn. Porn is an intensity addiction the same way meth is. It does the same stuff to the brain. And the reward center kind of shuts down a little bit, and it's much harder to experience pleasure. And it needs 6 months to a year usually to recover and reset to baseline. So some of this may just be, if your husband has a year of solid sobriety away from porn and acting out sexually, and he's still struggling, you've definitely got some shame and underlying issues. But it may come back in 6 months to a year as the neurobiology resets, but probably it's a little bit from column A and a little bit from column B. And
right.
Sex addicts tend to have a lot of sexual shame.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Oh yeah, no, it's interesting how many people I work with, they're like, man, I'm terrible at this. And it's like, yeah, I mean, because if you can't do relationships, you can't do good sex. Like, and I'm not talking about the intensity of sex. I'm talking about the intimacy of sex. If you can't do intimacy, then, I mean, intimacy within sex is amazing, right? It's the synchronicity of sex and that intimacy that makes it so good. And so if you don't do intimate relationships, then you might be able to perform sexually, but it's just that, it's a performance.
Yeah.
How's that to end our...
That's great. I'm going to make you write a book about boundaries because that's your take on boundaries. So we're going to start working on you on that, and I'm going to work on you about. Let's talk about the process of disclosure in 2 weeks. Just what it looks like, start to finish. Can you do that? Will you do that?
I love it. You're like committing me. You're committing me live on air.
Yeah.
I actually, you know what? Hang on real quick. Let me take a look. 2 weeks would be June.
Or 4 weeks or whenever. I mean,
Yeah. Okay, so let's do this. Scott, I'm going to commit you. Let's you and I exchange some emails back and forth, and let's dial it in. Because the thought that comes in my head is I feel like we've talked about disclosure a lot.
We have, but we haven't done it like a start to finish. This is what disclosure looks like.
Well, sure. And I guess, so let's you and I start to develop some bullet points, and let's work on something together. And then we can go there, and I'm more than happy to throw in what I think works really well. Now, obviously, every clinician maybe has their own style and what works for them. But I'm happy to go there if that would help everyone.
Cool. I think that would be cool. All right. I will email you. Everybody, thank you for coming. This was, again, I'm so sorry about being late. I'm not going to throw the blame on someone else, but I'm.
Are you
I
in?
know, but I really want to.
Are you in shame?
A tiny bit. I'll be
Yeah,
in more
you know
shame if I
what?
just blame
You know
somebody else.
what? Can I tell you how many people would have even thought about it after this is over? Well, that's what's interesting. I totally get it, right? When I feel like I've screwed something up, I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel terrible. And I'll sit and think about it. So you know the best thing to do to get rid of your shame?
Blame someone else, obviously.
No. Reach out.
I
So,
know.
Scott, the next time your shame comes up about this, I want you to reach to me and be like,
Okay.
Matt,
All right.
are you gonna text me?
I will. Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, I'm gonna get some Scott time.
Yeah. So, all right, everybody. Thank you for being here. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Thank you, Matt. Have a good weekend, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye, everyone.